Swinburne University of Technology.
Today I'm interviewing for the PhD Hub Dr Carolyn Barnes, who's the Academic Director of Research Training for the Centre of Design Innovation. And Carolyn has a great deal of knowledge and is very dynamic about contemporary models of the PhD, and design, of course, is particularly and peculiarly fitted for this, I think. One of the things Carolyn is very interested in is the question that's moved from big data, really, to wicked problems, and wicked problems are what we're going to talk about today. So do you want to start off with what you think a wicked problem is?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the sort of theoretical discussion of it, it comes from policy studies in the early 1970s with a famous essay by Horst and Rittel. And they did mention, they mentioned the word design in relation to this notion of a wicked problem, which is an idea of a cascading set of problems where really there's no solution, there's multi-interdisciplinary solutions. Many things have to happen to solve this problem. Something like drug abuse, for example. There's no solution, criminal solution isn't the solution. But because they wrote this essay on the design of policy, but the design field sort of pricked up its ears and took on this notion of wicked problems, and ever since has been really inspired and increasingly really inspired with the notion that the best application of design is in solving these intractable social problems with a sort of, and I think in design there's this notion that because the wicked problem's cascading, you know, as you solve one aspect of it, you're really identifying more problems. So you get this whole tangle or complex of interrelated issues. And design itself has this iterative approach to things, so that, you know, people develop things, they reflect on that, they develop it some more, they prototype, they test, until, you know, they come to a final solution. So there was this idea that wicked problems had a sort of natural relationship to the design process, and designers have often, you know, going back into modernity, early modernity, when design really developed, they've had a strong social conscience. So the modernists, you know, they wanted to make a better, you know, sort of purer, universal, transformative design to save the world. And that's come down to contemporary designers. And so most designers, you know, they want to make a difference. They want to develop something, you know, that's going to change things, make things better. And that's really then come into the whole field of PhD.
And that's a really interesting thing, because instead of seeing it as intractable, you see it as a wonderful opportunity or series of opportunities. But as far as the PhD is concerned, of course, the traditional model of identifying a research question and then coming to some kind of conclusion after you've got your data is just not applicable, is it?
It's not really the thing to do. So, you know, often in design, people, well, in maybe the most progressive PhDs that people are actually doing live projects. They're doing a project, so they're doing the project, gathering data, reflecting on the project, and they're doing all of this at the same time. And it can be quite challenging because you never know where the project's going to go. But most designers would see that design's an applied, contextualised, you know, practice anyway. It doesn't exist outside of context, and so this thought of doing projects just comes naturally to designers, and they find a way to do that.
And so that's how you manage it with your PhD students. If they come to you, what's the nexus between that and the wicked problem kind of ideal?
Well, not all of the students that I have are working on social innovation projects. That's a particular thing that I'm interested in, but I do have students working on those types of projects. But mostly most of the people, even if they're academics or people wanting an academic career, they would still want to be involved in doing design, and often they would be wanting to do design in a community context. And a lot of the time they're working on projects that developed out of their practice. So I've had quite a few PhD students who come from an exhibition or interpretation design background. So they've worked in that area of practice, and they become very frustrated by the fact that they're working in museums or heritage sites, and curators, they work with curators. Curators are often trained historians. curators often have higher qualifications. There's a vast literature of museum studies that's run by curators. Design's completely marginalised and devalued in that whole practice, while at the same time there's this rhetoric about how important the the museum visitor experience is, but there's no real acknowledgement that design is the thing that often frames the story, tells the story, creates the experience. And so out of their frustration, they've really come and said, I really want to do something about interpretation design, exhibition design. I want to publish in this area, and I want it to have a rightful place and to be recognised. And they bring with them extremely interesting projects, which have often have implicit wicked problems. Like, for example, what's the chain of decision making in a museum or a heritage site, according to how things happen, how the whole physical context comes about. Typically, designers are brought in at the wrong time, and so they're reflecting back on projects they've done, often very major projects. 6-hectare zoo site in Auckland, for example, that had all the landscape types in New Zealand with an overlay of Indigenous Maori heritage, and how you would develop that.
Incredibly complex.
Exactly. So you've got this incredible rich project that can be examined, and then you can start looking at what happened. And all right, so there's data gathered, there's interviews are done, but you can really develop a lot of knowledge out of that about what happened, what the issues are, what the position of design is. So it's, to me, even though it's based around a project that's dealing with sort of contemporary contextualised issues, knowledge production is really not a problem, but not in the traditional way.
And you as a supervisor, how do you enable your PhD candidate to focus? Because this sounds, a wicked problem is incredibly broad, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, within that, you have to identify some clear questions, and all of the PhDs my students do have, they would seem quite traditional in form. They have a literature review, they have a literature review that identifies, clear questions and sub-questions. And so within all of the possibility, in any project, there's probably 100 PhDs, we would be isolating one specific problem within that project to look at, and they would be doing 1 or 3 cases. So, looking at how these things played out across a set of projects. And yeah, you do need to focus. There's all the same sorts of questions about how many people can I interview, how many people can I survey, how much time have I got to analyse the data. So you've got to, the research design and methods chapter is really important in these studies. Everything's worked out there beforehand, before anyone sort of, a lot of case documentation will come with these projects. So there'll be, piles and piles of architects and designers' drawings. There'll be lots and lots of documentation, so bid documents and, all of the emails going back and forward. Clients are very generous in letting you work on that material, even though sometimes it's a bit like, you're really getting a look inside an institution, not always at its best time, but we have to make some big decisions about what's the question, what's the range of data we're going to be looking at, how we're going to analyse all of that, and all of that's really worked out before they then go into the cases and start gathering data.
And a colleague of mine taught me many years ago a very good line: this is a very important matter, but it's not within the scope of this thesis or this project.
We do a lot of that.
Yes. Well, you'd have to in a wicked problem, wouldn't you? Because you can't cover every possible contingency and every possible aspect of it. The group of 8 universities last year published a paper on this, with which I'm sure you're familiar, which they saw as a contemporary model for industry. Well, in design you're used to practice and industry, as you've just pointed out. Would you like to comment on that as a broader look at this model?
I think there's that there's all of that discussion about, triple helix knowledge production and those sorts of things, and you know, the whole of the world is really wanting applied knowledge as well as this sort of pure knowledge. And
yes.
I mean, design just lives in the real world. So you know, there's theorising about design, but really I think you learn the most in looking at, you know, in looking at projects. So it's sort of inevitable that it's going to go that way. And you know, theoretical PhDs about design, and there's a lot of sort of experimental studies done in design which really are quite fake. They're often done with design students and, you know, prototyping, nothing in the real world. And yes, they move knowledge forward, but not in a sense. Like, to look at what's happening in the real world really tells you a lot about design. So I think it's absolutely, you know, vital that this is the way that design progresses.
And new PhD models are developing also because more and more people are doing PhDs for a variety of reasons. It used to only be really academics, and very few of those who did a PhD in an Australian university until relatively recently. So I guess you have people who are not going to become academics necessarily.
Well, yes, and increasingly I'm being approached in my role as academic director of research training. So I've sort of got two hats here. I've got my own students and doing my own research, but I'm really fielding inquiries from all people wanting to do research projects from a design perspective in the CDI, and we're just getting more and more people from industry. Often people at about the 10 to 15 years out of design school, and they've gone out there, they're experienced, they're doing interesting and successful things, but they really want a higher level of engagement. So it's almost a bit like that "is this all there is" moment. They really want to step it up, and they're just thinking, well, I'll come back and I'll do a PhD, but about something that I do. And I think their intention is, I mean, some might maybe be thinking, you know, they enjoyed design school and they would like to be an academic, and they understand that you need a PhD to really move forward as an academic at this time in history. But they want to go back to practice, and maybe they want to work internationally as well. I mean, in Australia, design research in Australia is quite young. It is only a little bit older internationally, but design PhDs and PhD qualifications, particularly in Asia and Europe, are very well respected. And if they want to work internationally, they're now starting to say things. If I had a PhD, I would be taken much more seriously by my European or my Asian clients. And so they're seeing the value of a PhD around their practice.
So we've seen the design school at Swinburne University has always been very famous, we know this, and you've said what the students get from it, but we get something from it in knowledge production too, don't we? In recognising different forms of knowledge within the academy, bringing knowledge about practice into the academy.
Oh, completely. And I think also the other thing that's becoming more obvious, particularly in the new faculty structure, is how many great connections can be made between design and other areas. And so, you know, design is about realising things in the real world, and designers have amazing skills in imagining, visualising, envisioning, prototyping. And so really, if any other researchers are wanting to you know, have an impact on the world, to have designers on your team is just amazing, because then you can do things. It's interesting. A student I've got, she's really, you know, she's seeing within the literature that sociologists, for example, are extremely good at identifying social problems, but they're incredibly frustrated because they can't do anything about them. They don't actually have any skills. I mean, they can maybe make recommendations, they can write papers, they can gather data, they can make recommendations, but beyond that, they actually don't have any skills to make things happen in the real world. And now they're starting to want to join with designers. So I think designers plus other researchers is really, really powerful.
Carolyn, you're such a dynamic person, and your insights into this whole question of the new PhD, the contemporary PhD, particularly in relationship to wicked problems, is terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
has been a Swinburne production.